Greetings, adventurers. This is Lorne, your guild advisor, and welcome to my review for DanMachi Season 4, episodes 10 through 11. Now, this is going to be my take as a light novel reader on how the last two episodes of this first core of Season 4 were adapted. I want to preface this by saying that, as a whole, I think this first core of Season 4 is pretty much easily the best adaptation that DanMachi has had in terms of converting the content from the light novel into the anime format, because with this, there wasn't any really big gigantic major cuts in terms of plot relevance that were made in this season. Pretty much everything is kept intact except for a few minor details and advanced explanations on certain things in the show, but nothing to take away from what actually happened during the season, as opposed to stuff like Season 1, which turned Volume 4 into just one episode by completely taking out some of the stuff about Naza, and then Season 2 with its own outwardly thing where they adapted Volume 8, which is one of the longest volumes in the series, into just 2 episodes, basically cutting out 80% of what happens in that, and cutting that 80% from Volume 8 during Season 2 directly affected how Season 3 would be adapted, though at the same time, a lot of the problems with Season 3 also exist because they only had 12 episodes to work with to adapt 3 light novels. And it's it's a bit shorter, but it's a similar page count to what's happening with volumes 12 through 14 of Season 4. But Season 4 is going to be 2 cores, most likely 22 episodes in total, whereas Season 3 was just 12. So again, Season 4 is probably the best adaptation DanMachi has had in terms of converting the light novel content into anime form. Though a lot of this review is going to sound like me nitpicking, but I only do this because I love the show, I love the series, and overall, guys, again, like I said, this is the best adaptation that the series has had, but there are things in episode 10 and 11 that I wish were just done a bit better. To me, at least, it seems that after the Mas Huge arc, so after episode 6, it seems that the production kind of lowered in quality, because I think what was happening towards the end of part 1 was that they were getting more people to start working on part 2. And if I guess in terms of priority, if I wanted them to focus on one thing or the other, it would be part 2, because that's my favorite. It's going to adapt my favorite volume in the entire series. But again, I still kind of wish that this finale for Volume 13, episodes 10 and 11, were just a bit more ambitious in terms of what was presented on the screen. But yeah, let's just start on my commentary for episode 10. I want to open up with, I really liked how they kept a lot of the gruesomeness of the Juggernaut intact, because before I was voicing that I was a tiny bit worried that they might tone down the gore aspect, and it didn't really seem like they did that. Of course, there was the darkening of blood, because I think that's just something they kind of have to do with when the show airs in Japan. I'm not exactly sure, but I know that there are certain restrictions on gore and such when it comes to stuff appearing on Japanese television, and I'm curious on if we'll see that stuff be undarkened when they release the Blu-ray release of the show. But yeah, I'm glad they kept the gruesomeness in there. We see a lot of dismemberment, a lot of bleeding, a lot of bodies cut in half, bodies being eaten. I was very happy they kept that in. Now I sound like a gore nut. Well, I'm really not. I can't. In real life, I cannot stand the sight of blood, even my own. I'll stub my toe and I won't want to look at it. that's how squeamish I am around real life injuries. But yeah, a lot of the complaints I've seen about episode 10, and I thought maybe it was just me being impatient while watching the episode, because I'm man, Like, I just want to see Bell start fighting the Juggernaut. Like, why is it taking so long? But yeah, a lot of the criticisms about episode 10 was like the large amount of exposition and dialogue that was happening with like Jura and Uranus. And I do want to like note that, like I said this in the cuts and changes video, but a lot of the times, like the very beginning when Jura is talking about all this stuff, like Belle is supposed to be like holding on to Ryu because it's a struggle for her to like just like stand up straight because she's like going through a lot of PTSD when it comes to Juggernaut. So having Belle and Ryu like kind of just stand apart and then just like watching Jura go on his TED Talk was a bit awkward. The anime production for like these last few episodes did not seem as ambitious. I don't think it's too much additional work in terms of animation. Like I'm not like asking them to like animate a fight and have like a bunch of keyframes to draw. Like just the character placement and the storyboarding could have been a bit tighter when it came to these dialogue scenes, so it's not just characters standing around and watching Jura make weird faces. And also, I mentioned that they gave Belle some very weird dialogue that doesn't exist in the light novel, where Belle is kind of like repeating stuff that he should already know. Because he's like, yo, that's the familia that Ryu was in. Like, you notice, Ryu told you, like, in when she was given her whole story about her familia dying and then taking revenge all the way back in season 1. Though in season 1, Ryu like never says the name of her familia, but she does in the light novel. Like she straight up like says Estrella Familia. I'm not sure why they didn't just keep like the name Estrella Familia in when it came to season 1, but Belle already knows like a lot of this stuff. And I mentioned that Boris even says, yo, this is Jura from Ruger Familia, who set that trap in the dungeon, which caused the deaths of Estrella Familia. And then later on in the episode, when Jura is talking, Belle is like, yo, this is the guy that's responsible. It's like, what? It was so weird to see that, because I'm like, this doesn't happen in the light novel. Why are they giving Belle like lines that make him seem so dumb? Like I thought like maybe they're just giving him these lines to remind the viewer, but I'm like, are you just trying to say like the viewer's too dumb to remember this stuff? I don't know. Like again, like some weird stuff is like happening in this episode in terms of adaptation. Like it's I mentioned that it's kind of obvious that they were like stretching out the content to end the episode on the cliffhanger of Belle getting his arm cut off and his status being unknown. Like, is Belle gonna be okay? Like, it really seemed like they stretched the episode out to end on that point, and it doesn't help that they had that like minute and a half recap as well, because it was kind of clear that they were like stretching out the episode. And man, like another way that they could have made the dialogue engaging when it came to like Jura, at least, like you'll hear a lot of people say like show don't tell, like instead of like this is a visual medium, that's what anime is. So unlike a light novel where it's just like words on the page and it's not really that weird to be like reading a bunch of like exposition when you're reading through a story, in an anime when a character is just talking for like 5 minutes straight, it can kind of get annoying. So they could have done a bit more with the visuals, and again, like show don't tell. Like instead of Jura like talking about the trap that he set for Estrella Familia, what they could have done is actually like have a flashback and like show images of that trap happening, and that would be a bit more visually engaging than like Ryu and Belle just listening to Jura's TED Talk in the middle of the anime. Like that's one thing they could have done. And there are instances in episode 10 where they do try to make the dialogue a bit more engaging in terms of like the visuals on screen, because when Uranus is talking about how he mentioned the Juggernaut to the Xenos so they could help out in case one was about to be summoned, or they feared that one might be summoned, they actually showed a shot of the Xenos like walking through Gnosis. That was a good job. That's what I mean by keeping the show like visually interesting when dialogue is happening. And again, I don't want to sound like overly nitpicky, but it's just that because this is the finale of the first core, like episodes 10 and 11, I'm going to be a bit more critical when it comes to stuff like this. And especially so because like in the past few episodes, I've been mentioning that it really seemed like they were like holding back on the animation. And I'm like, oh, they're doing that because they want to like go all out into future episodes. And then when those episodes came out, like there are some spectacular moments in episode 11 during the finale with Bell against the Juggernaut, but like as a whole, it really did not seem like they went all out like I thought they would when they were like starting to hold back on stuff like in episodes like 7 through 9, and then we had like episode 10 and 11. Like, oh, okay, I guess there's some cool stuff here, but it wasn't as crazy as I thought it would be. But again, I do understand that maybe there were like problems in the production schedule. Like a lot of times when you like work on a long project, like you're like, yo, this is going pretty good. Like with part 1 of season 4 at the first half, like, yo, this is going pretty smoothly. And as you get closer and closer to the ending, like the deadline, like, oh crap, we gotta hurry it up. Like I can imagine that happening. And then in terms of like just adaptions in general, I think manga adaptions are a bit easier to do in a sense as opposed to light novels, because a lot of the storyboarding is already done. Like a lot of how the scenes should be framed and seen is already done in manga because it's all drawn. Like you see the characters, you see the way that the manga artist like intended the scenes to look. And then in the light novel, the majority of it is text. So it requires like skilled directing to be able to put together a storyboard that works really well with the content that you are adapting. And I don't want to be too like overly mean or critical because, you know, I don't have the skills to direct an anime. Like I haven't like studied on how to do that. I don't have the skill set for it. I'm just saying like what I'm observing. But in terms of like directing and storyboarding, I think that season 1 of DanMachi was a lot stronger in that regard, and I think the movie was a lot stronger in that regard. Like I don't want to throw shade at the director, but we've had the same director on DanMachi for seasons 2, 3, and now 4, and it's just, to me, it's just a bit weaker than it was in season 1 and the movie. And when you look at the portfolio of what the director has worked on, it's not exactly like the best portfolio, if I'm trying to be gentle about it. But yeah, let's get into the first fight between Bell and the Juggernaut. So we have Bell always picking up a great sword from somewhere. Like whenever a great sword is in the area, Bell needs to grab it and fight against the monster without fail. And like I think it's like very apparent that in this first fight between Bell and the Juggernaut, like they really didn't go too out when it came to animation, and I was really hoping they would. Like first of all, we had that like minute and a half recap, and it seemed like they were just trying to get the fight over with really quickly. Because they wanted to focus more on the fight in episode 11, and I kind of get that, but like as I said in the cuts and changes video, they don't really like go out of their way to showcase the speed of the Juggernaut, because that's like a big sticking point in the light novel is like describing just how fast the Juggernaut is. It's bouncing around the room, it's jumping everywhere, like it's just super fast. And you don't really get that sense of speed too much when it comes to how they animate the Juggernaut in this episode. And I get why. It's because it's just probably like very difficult to animate Juggernaut with how it's designed, because it's a big monster with all these like long limbs, and it's probably a heck of a lot more complicated to animate than it would be like a Moss Huge or a Minotaur, which are more humanoid in form. So it's a bit easier to animate those than it is like something like Juggernaut. And one thing I said that like really bothered me was what happened with Bell's firebolt. Like I thought the reflection was fine, the magical reflection. I like the effect there. It's just like I mentioned this, Bell's armor just popping off. And it's super quick too. The first time I watched the episode, I'm like, wait a minute, what, like did Bell's armor just disappear? And then I kept rewatching the scene, like, oh, it's like only 1 second long, where his armor is like popping off his body in like the upper left corner of the screen, and like unless you like watch carefully in that area, I think it's really hard to see what happened there. And again, that's not what happens in the light novels. His armor doesn't just pop off after getting fire bolted. Again, like I question Welf. It's like, bro, like one firebolt and your armor that you made for me just pops off. Like maybe the leather straps on the armor like burned off, but like the armor straps on Bell's chest plates are behind him. How did the firebolt just like go on his body after reflection and just completely wrapped around him? And it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense. I don't know why they had to do it like that. Again, it was pretty clear to me that they were like more focused on the fight in episode 11 than in 10, but it was just a thing that like really bothered me, because what was really supposed to happen there was like after Bell gets his arm chopped off. And I do want to mention that when I was reading the light novel when volume 13 came out, and Bell's arm got like severed and you saw the illustration, like I was sitting down reading this, but when that happened and I saw the illustration, I legit like stood up. I stood up. I'm like, what is happening? What was my reaction? Oh, it was such a crazy moment in a light novel, because you're not expecting that to happen to Bell. Like, oh my god, his arm just came off. Like, crap. Like, this is serious. But yeah, like after his arm gets severed, like Juggernaut continues attacking, and that's when Ryu like shouts out to Bell, because she's warning him that Juggernaut's still attacking. And in the light novel, that's when Bell, like, oh my god, I can't imagine like how much pain Bell is in, like the shock already from losing his arm, but he like needs to still keep it together to prevent himself from dying. But basically, his arm gets cut off. Juggernaut's attacking. He lifts up his left arm with the arm protector still on there, and as the Juggernaut's claws, and the light novel puts a lot of emphasis on like the Juggernaut's claws of destruction, because they kind of like, you see them like rip and tear through everything, and they collide on Bell's armor protector, and it just crushes the armor. And then the Juggernaut like swipes away at Bell again, and it completely breaks all of Bell's armor. And that's what was supposed to happen, and I wish that's what we saw, because again, I again, me being like overly critical, like after you see Bell's armor like pop off in the anime after the firebolt, like I'm like looking closely at the ground, and they don't even draw like his armor anywhere. I'm like, man. Ugh. But I do want to say I liked how they animated like Bell's neck kind of snapping as the tail hit his neck, and the visible force that you could see like Bell getting like slingshotted across the room. They definitely wanted to end the episode there, and I mentioned that like between the recap and all the dialogue they were like stretching out, it was kind of clear that they were trying really hard to end the episode where they did, and they kind of like cut back on how long this first fight between Bell and Juggernaut was going to be. And then that leads us into episode 11. And I'll be honest with you guys, like the day before episode 11 premiered, I don't know why, I had like that feeling you get like the day before you had to like give a presentation like at school or at work. Like that was like the feeling of dread I had. I'm like, I just want this episode to be good. To be like super good. I think it's because of the past few episodes where I felt like the animation was just kind of, they were like holding back, and I'm like, I pray to God that they were holding back for this episode. And again, there are a lot of good moments in this episode I want to highlight, and there are some other minor things that I wish they could have improved on or done differently. And I think they did a pretty good job when it came to Ryu's fights against Juggernaut. Like, one of those things I mentioned was like just showcasing the sense of speed of Juggernaut, and I think they actually had a good shot of it when you see like Ryu and Juggernaut like leaping past each other. I thought that was a good shot that kind of displayed that sense of speed. And then, man, let's just let's just get into it. So that's when Bors and his other adventurer friends are about to like combine their magic weapons into a concurrent blast to send at Juggernaut. And then Juggernaut does his magic reflection. And I do want to point out, I really did like the animation for that magic blast. I like the coloring, the animation, and how it kind of lit up the room. And then how like the force of the reflection pushed Bell back into the water, like his body into the water. But that thing I mentioned in the cuts and changes video, which I thought was like super weird, was Bors was pretty much like unscathed from that, and then you see his other adventurer buddies are like all charred corpses, and Bors is just visibly like unscathed, like nothing happened to him. Like I guess what they were trying to point out was like maybe he was deflecting it with the magic weapon, but that's not really how they work. And it's like a super small dagger. I don't know how a blast that swallowed everyone up was somehow avoided by Bors from like one tiny magic dagger. Like none of that got on you at all. Like his clothes aren't burnt. I mentioned that in the light novel, Bors is actually like towards the back of the party, so he's not like taking a direct hit from that magic blast. And his eye patch was like burnt off, and you can actually see like his empty eye socket in terms of the light novel and how that scene was presented. I'm like, why this is so weird. Like, why did they adapt it this way into the anime? But yeah, to me, it was just so weird. They had like this magic blast that was the combination of multiple magic weapons reflected back at them, and Bors is completely unscathed, but somehow Bell shoots one firebolt, and it's not even like a Argonaut charged one. He shoots one firebolt at Juggernaut, and somehow Bell is blown back and his armor's like just popped off. Like it's just weirdly inconsistent. And then we kind of have that moment where Ryu is pretty much like giving up and surrendering to her fate. Like she kind of wishes that she could explain herself more to the waitresses at the pub. But there's a part of her that's going, you know, maybe it's better this way. I'll finally be purged of my sins by dying here, and I'll finally be reunited with my old familia. Like I kind of wish that they like showed images of her familia in that moment. Though again, there was a part of me that was like, maybe they're just trying to like hold back on showing Estrella familia for right now because they want that to be a surprise for part 2. But then we got like the part 2 trailer where we like straight up see them, and then we get their character design. So it's kind of weird to think that was the logic there. I also thought it would be a good way, like, just to show like some brief images of them in that moment as Ryu was thinking about them, showing those images of them. And that's just a good way to promote the Estrella record novels that are coming out in Japan. Like, are you curious about these characters that Ryu was thinking about? Go ahead and read Estrella record volume 1 that comes out on October. Like, I thought that would have been a good way to promote it. But again, they did showcase Estrella Familia a lot with the Season 4 Part 2 promo trailer, as well as the updated character design page on the main website. So they're promoting the Estrella Familia characters that way. But then we have the final fight between Juggernaut and Bell in his restored form after being restored by Mari. Now I'm going to be super nitpicky when it comes to this fight, but this is the final fight, the finale of the first core for this show, so I think I kind of have to be nitpicky because this is the final fight. We're going to end this first core with a bang, and it kind of does in terms of like, oh my god, our characters are like indeed crap at the end of the episode. But with the light novel, it says that as Bell is like running towards Juggernaut, he's like a bullet, a speeding bullet, and the way that Bell's like running towards the Juggernaut, it doesn't really seem that way, because it just kind of seems like just a normal run, not really like a speeding bullet per se, though again, super nitpicky. But after, as I was making notes on what to talk about in this review, I was rewatching the Minotaur fight from Season 1 a lot, and just watching those scenes and how that was directed and animated. And I still think that the Minotaur fight from season 1 is the best animated and directed fight of the entire series still. Like, I don't think it's a question, because like everything just fits together so well. Like the music, the voice acting, you hear the desperation in Bel's voice as he's like saying like faster, faster, faster. This is my adventure, stuff like that. Like all that works so well with how the fight was directed. Like when you see a scene of Bell running towards the Minotaur, you really do see that sense of speed, but that's Bell level 1 running at the Minotaur, so he should be running a heck of a lot faster as a level 4 running towards the Juggernaut. Again, super nitpicky, but like this should be a fight that's more impressive than the Minotaur fight from season 1. And to be like frank, to be quite honest, I don't think I'm being like that overly critical about this fight, because I kind of came into the Moss Huge fight like hoping it was going to be done well, and they like blew my expectations when it came to the Moss Huge fight. I'm like, man, this looks really good. Like they even included like original sequences that I thought looked like super hype. One being like Bell in the air, like twisting his body and cutting through and then running across the walls in the Moss Huge fight. Like there was some like original creative scenes that were done there, and you didn't really feel that same sense of ambition when it came to this fights against Juggernaut. And again, I've said this before, but it's probably very difficult to animate something like Juggernaut as opposed to something more humanoid like the Minotaur and the Moss Huge. But again, I think there are creative ways to do it, and I wish they were a bit more creative when it came to this fight. And the other thing that I've noted in the cuts and changes video is that the light novel makes a big point that Bell destroyed one of the reverse knee joints on the Juggernaut to prevent it from jumping around. And as I like point out in the cuts and changes video, I think I see where they tried to display that maybe, but they don't make a big point out of it, because like if they wanted to make that a big point, you would show like Bell attacking a certain spot on the body, and then it would make sense to have like a close up shot of like the reverse knee joint being destroyed, and then having the Juggernaut like kind of like stumble a little bit. But they didn't do that in the anime. So when like later on when Bell says like I've stopped it from jumping, and I'm like, and when I'm watching the anime, I'm like, Bell, when did you do that? It was never like really apparent when you like stop it from jumping around. I don't think that was made clear through the animation here. So that was something I wish they emphasized more in the anime, because I just thought it was a bit strange. For a direct comparison in terms of like the Minotaur fight versus this final Juggernaut one, in the Minotaur fight, when you see Bell like jump to avoid an attack and then ram his Hestia knife into the arm of the Minotaur, you then get like a close-up shot of Bell twisting the knife, and I love the animation where he's twisting the knife. It feels so visceral, and that's what makes the Minotaur like drop the greatsword, and then later on Bell picks up that greatsword after he disarms the Minotaur. Like that's the kind of like directing that I kind of wanted to see with the Juggernaut fight. Like for example, with the reverse knee joint, directly show Bell taking out the kneecap and then bringing attention to it, instead of just having Bell like go, yes, I took away its mobility. And that's just an example of like storyboarding and directing when it comes to those two different fights. But then the final sequence of Argo Vesta being used on Juggernaut, I thought that was done very well. Like it was animated super well. I liked the animation for when Bell is firing Firebolt and then tempering it onto his Hestia knife and then charging in. I liked the animation of how Bell like throws the scarf to get the Juggernaut closer to him, because the Juggernaut's trying to retreat. So Bell throws that scarf to pull himself in to Juggernaut. And oh yeah, and the other thing that they don't really point out in the anime is that Bell's arm is kind of like jello at this point. Because though like him deflecting the claws with the scarf prevents him from like being like cut into pieces, the force of that still like being put onto his arm So it's like Jello at this point. Like the pain is screaming at him, and he's like fighting through that as he's pulling himself to the Juggernaut by strapping himself to it with the Goliath scarf. And then that final blow, I like how it was like presented. The only thing that I wish they changed was like actually showing Juggernaut trying to shield himself with his claw, like his right claw, because in the light novel, the knife Argo Vesta like collides with the claws, the right claw specifically, and the claws shatter, and you don't see it shatter in the anime. Though in the next shot, if you're looking carefully, you see that the Juggernaut's like right arm is gone. I just wish they actually showed the moment where the claws were shattered, because I like, unless you were like looking for it, I don't think you would notice it. Like, I don't know how an anime viewer sees like those scenes, but I feel like there wasn't enough attention brought to that. And another thing I mentioned in the cuts and changes video is that for some reason they cut out one of Bell's thoughts as he's fighting. Like I mentioned that his arm is like screaming in pain at him, and Bella's like trying to will himself through it. And one of the things he thinks about to like psych himself up is like, Bell Crandall, why are you here on this floor? It's for her, like for Ryu. And like even Ryu like kind of sees like Bell's like yelling, and Ryu realizes like who exactly that Bell is yelling for. And I wish they like adapted that scene in the anime, or like try to showcase those thoughts in the anime, because that's part of what made the Minotaur fight in season 1 so memorable, is like hearing Bell's thoughts as he's fighting. And like, I want to be able to do this myself. I don't want Eyes Wallenstein to save me again. Like, I'm doing this for her. Why am I here on this floor? It's for her. Again, that's also part of me that's like a big Ryu fan. So any content that involves her, I do want to see. But again, I think it would be a lot more emotional if they kept that line of Bell saying that, because that's actually like in italics in the light novel. So that's something that Bell is actually like directly thinking. But they like showcase like Bell thinking about Lily and the other adventurers that are on the floor, but they don't adapt that line for some reason, which I wish they did. And I did like the presentation of how the magic collar that Jura was trying to put on the Juggernaut was done. Thought it was kind of funny that it was like kind of like a Pokeball, but I thought that was also kind of neat, because when I was reading the novel, I was like wondering how exactly like Jura put that collar on him. Like, did Jura just get on top of the monster and put it on? But the Pokeball-like thing I thought was a nice touch. And then Bell and Ryu get swallowed up by the Lambton and are taken down into the deep floors with the Juggernaut following after them. Then we transition back into the expedition party, and they have the Amphisbaena to worry about. I like how the anticipation was kind of built up, because you like see the water, and then you see like something racing up the waterfall. I like how that was framed. I thought that was well done. I was always expecting the Amphisbaena to be CG because of how big it was in the light novel, though I will say it kind of looked a bit rough in this episode. Like, I think the crystals on the Amphisbaena look pretty good. They match the art style of the anime pretty well. It's just like the body and scales kind of clash with the art style of the anime a tiny bit. So I hope things are polished a bit more when we get closer to January, when part 2 is supposed to start premiering. But yeah, I am looking forward to seeing how they animate the fights against the Amphisbaena, because I've always been curious on what that would look like in animated form. And then I really love the tone, like the sense of dread that you feel in the anime when you see Bell and Ryu like make it out of the Lambton, and you just see like darkness all around, and you see how tattered their clothes are. You see like that they're burnt everywhere from the stomach acid of the Lambton. I love how that looks. And then you of course see that in the key visual for part 2 as well. Like they got that down. They got how battered and beat down that Bell and Ryu are supposed to look as they have to fight through this hell basically of the deep floors. I mentioned before that Astrea Familia's dungeon range was 441, but that's like with the whole Familia together, them all being level 4s and 3s together in a party in like tip-top condition with supplies. This is a Ryu with her leg broken and Bell all beaten down. Like his left arm is basically jelly at this point. Like they have no supplies. They're they're not in a good spot, and I'm glad that the anime seemed to nail the tone in that regard. But yeah, that's how part 1 of season 4 ends. This super big cliffhanger that's the exact same as the light novel, so you guys got to experience what light novel readers got to experience back when we read volume 13, except we had to wait 9 months for volume 14. You guys are waiting just 3 months, so you guys got it easier, okay? But again, I'm worried that this video will come off as like super nitpicky because, again, I'm being super critical about these last 2 episodes because they are the last 2 episodes. It's the finale to the season. And again, I felt like they were kind of holding back when it came to like the previous few episodes before this. Again, I mentioned that the Moss Huge arc, episodes 1 through 6 basically, had a pretty solid production. And it just seems like the Moss Huge fight overall was just more polished than the Juggernaut one. Again, I mentioned a few reasons for why that might be. The Juggernaut being a bit more complicated to animate, possibly the production schedule being a bit tight as they got closer and closer to these dates of when the episodes need to premiere, and likely the staff like needing to transition into working on part 2. That's probably also a factor. But again, even though I recognize like a lot of those things, like the production schedule, like maybe not allowing for more time to be dedicated to this stuff in episode 10 and 11, even though I recognize that, at the same time, it doesn't change what those episodes are. It doesn't change, like understanding that doesn't change what I see on the screen. Like it's not like when Cyberpunk 2077 released, people didn't go, oh, they had to rush this game out, that's okay. Like, like, you know, it was heavily criticized for the condition it came out in. So that's maybe an extreme example. Like DanMachi season 4 part 1 is not nearly as bad as the state that Cyberpunk came out in. But yeah, that's kind of my mindset, is that episodes 10 and 11 could have been better, but it's not like they were bad. I mentioned earlier that season 4 is easily like the best adaptation DanMachi has had in terms of adapting stuff from the light novel. Though again, I do think that the Moss Huge fight was better than the Juggernaut one, though I really did like the ending sequence to the Juggernaut fight with the Argo Vesta and how that was done. And I still think to this day that the Minotaur fight is unmatched in terms of like animation and overall direction of that fight, which is weird to say because that's from season 1 and we're on season 4 now. And again, I do think the production schedule of the show is super tight because I think part 2 basically has to come out in January because of all this stuff they have aligned to promote with DanMachi. I mentioned in the news video I uploaded earlier that they have the 10th anniversary project happening right now. And the first announcement of the 10th anniversary project, there's gonna be like 10 different announcements. The first announcement was like 6 light novels to be released in 6 consecutive months. So the 3 Astrea record novels coming out starting October. So volume 1, October, 2, November, 3, December. And then in January, volume 18 of the main series will release. And then Sororatoria volumes 13 and 14 will release in February and March. And I think a lot of projects are like scheduled to like happen all at the same time to use as like cross promotion with the anime. So part 2 like has to come out in January. Like it has to. They can't. I feel like that's something that they're like not going to delay whatsoever. So I think that's a lot of what happened here. The last half of this first part of season 4 was maybe a bit less ambitious on the storyboarding and animation side, because they're like saving everything to make sure that part 2 is in good condition, because it has to come out in January. Like if I want to like compare it to other light novel adaptations that are like exemplary, like Mushoku Tensei, an extremely good anime adaptation of a light novel series. They had the first core premiere and then they actually delayed the second core. Like, it was always a split core, but there was only supposed to be like a 3-month break, but they extended that to a 6-month break for part 2, and it worked extremely well. Like, I'm glad they took that break, because part 2 of the first season for Mushoku Tensei looks amazing. It was produced very well, and that's probably something, again, that DanMachi Season 4 cannot do, because of so many projects aligning at the same time to be like promoted together. Another anime I want to like point to is 86, another very good anime adaptation of a light novel series. They had like their split core break that they did not delay starting the second core, but they had to delay the last 2 episodes of that split core to like months later, because they just couldn't make it in time. On the plus side, it all ended very well. Like, it wasn't like noticeably like bad in terms of animation. Like, it still looked super solid and ended very well. But that's another example where they delayed an anime from its original release schedule. But again, I don't think DanMachi is in a position where they can actually do that. So all we can hope is that DanMachi Season 4 Part 2 looks amazing and has a solid production schedule. Like, maybe, hopefully, hopefully the less ambitious finale for Part 1. Maybe that's the price we have to pay for an exemplary adaptation of Part 2. Like, I hope so, because I've said this before when Season 4 started to air, that if I am not like on the floor crying tears of joy from the finale, like the final fight of Part 2, there is a problem. There is a problem, and it's not going to be a good one. So I really hope that things work out in the end, and it's like the amazing finale that I'm like wishing it to be, because like reading that final fight is extremely emotional, and it's just it's incredible. It's incredible. So if I'm like hyping this up super hard, and anime onlys are watching this video and are like already dying from the cliffhanger, like, you can just start reading from volume 14, because episode 11 pretty much ends exactly where volume 13 ends. So you can just pick up volume 14 right now and start from there if you want to read the light novels. Though again, like, me being the purist that I am, is like, read all the light novels, or at least read from 13, because I think it's really cool to see like the thoughts of other characters, Ryu especially, because I mentioned before they did not like adapt the monologue that she has in the light novel from her own first-person point of view. Looking very forward to Season 4 Part 2, because I like what I saw of the trailer. I'm excited to see more of Estrella Familia and them finally being animated. I talked about it in the news video, but I'm really excited that we got to see the animated long-haired Ryu in her younger days. I really just want to see what that looks like animated with Estrella Familia scenes. I'm super excited to see that happen. And of course, the final fight of Part 2. But that's a ways away. But anyway, guys, that was my my big nitpicky review of episodes 10 through 11. But again, I thought they did a great job overall adapting the content of the light novel. I just kind of felt like they lost steam in terms of the ambition of some of the storyboarding and scenes and animation when it came to the second half of the first part. Because again, I think the first half with the Monster Huge arc was just it looked better than the second half with Part 1. But again, I think they're just going full steam ahead on focusing on Part 2 of Season 4. But yeah, I'm curious on what your guys' thoughts are on this first part of Season 4 overall in terms of the story content and the animation. I'm especially curious on the opinions of other people that have read the light novels and how you thought the Juggernaut fight was handled. Were you satisfied? Like, I would say I am satisfied, but I wish it could have been a bit more in terms of them focusing on certain like details to make the fight a bit smoother that I pointed out earlier in the video. But yeah, we got a lot of stuff to look forward to in January, and just the franchise as a whole, with all these light novel announcements and the 10th anniversary happening in January as well, and the 10th anniversary 10 projects that are going to be announced in the future. But as I mentioned before, I will be making more DanMachi content as we wait for part 2 of season 4. A lot of it is going to be focused on like covering characters and points I think that would be useful to know about before season 4 part 2 comes out. So a lot of focus on certain characters like the waitresses from the pub and also Estrella Familia. So be on the lookout for those videos. I think I'll take it a bit easy for this week at least, and then get myself back into the groove like 1 week from now. I'm a bit exhausted having gone through this gauntlet of part 1 of season 4. I was prepared to do this, even if it wasn't split cord, even if it was like all 22 episodes at once. But I'm glad we have this little break in between so I can get a breather. But yeah, if you like this video and want to see more DanMachi content, make sure to like this and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to follow me on my socials. And this is Lauren, your Guild Advisor, signing out.